General Vorkath stood at the edge of the massive training field, arms crossed, his dark eyes scanning the human recruits below. The air smelled of sweat and blood. Dust rose as groups of humans ran, jumped, and fought, their bodies pushed to the absolute limit. He had expected to be unimpressed. After all, the Galactic Council believed humans were weak, relying too much on their intelligence rather than physical ability. But what he was seeing now, this was something else. A loud voice echoed across the field. Obstacle course. Full gear. Move. The recruits didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the starting line, wearing heavy armor that should have slowed them down. Instead, they moved like predators, their bodies lean, their eyes focused. Vorkath watched as they threw themselves into the course. The first obstacle was a wall, twice their height. Other species would need assistance or technology to climb it. The humans, they simply ran at it full speed, jumped, grabbed the top, and hauled themselves over. The second obstacle, barbed wire, low to the ground. Any mistake would tear flesh. The recruits didn't slow down. They threw themselves on their bellies, crawling through the mud, ignoring the cuts on their arms and backs. Then came the fire pits. The recruits leaped through the flames, some catching fire briefly before rolling on the ground to put it out. No screams, no panic. Just pure, relentless movement. Vorkath felt a strange sense of unease. This level of training, it's beyond standard military conditioning, he muttered. The human officer beside him, Commander Hale, smirked. They're just getting started. Vorkath turned to look at him. You push them too hard. Some of them will break. Hale chuckled. If they break, they don't belong here. The general was about to respond when he heard a sharp cry. One of the recruits had fallen, his ankle twisted at an unnatural angle. His face twisted in pain, but he didn't stop. Vorkath expected the medics to rush forward. They didn't. Instead, one of the instructors walked over and dropped a combat knife in front of the injured recruit. If you can't stand, crawl. If you can't crawl, drag yourself. No one is coming to save you. Vorkath's breath caught in his throat. To his shock, the recruit gritted his teeth, grabbed the knife, and began pulling himself forward. His injured leg dragged behind him, blood soaking the dirt, but he refused to stop. By the time he reached the end of the course, his hands were raw, his face covered in sweat, and yet he smiled. Vorkath felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't just training. This was something far worse. The test continued. Next, the recruits were given live weapons, real bullets, real explosives. They were paired up and forced to fight in hand-to-hand combat. No mercy, no holding back. Bones broke, blood spilled, and yet no one surrendered. If a recruit fell, they got back up. If they were knocked unconscious, they were revived and forced to fight again. Vorkath turned to Hale. Your soldiers fight like their lives depend on it. Hale's smirk faded. That's because one day they will. The general felt something cold settle in his gut. The Galactic Council had always thought of humanity as just another species, clever, adaptable, but not a true military force. That assumption had been a mistake, because this wasn't training. This was survival. And Vorkath was beginning to wonder, who exactly were the humans preparing to fight? General Vorkath's dark eyes followed the recruits as they sprinted across the field, their boots pounding the ground in perfect unison. Not a single one hesitated, not even when the next obstacle ahead of them looked impossible. He had seen military training across the galaxy. He had personally overseen the conditioning of the Council's most elite warriors. But this was something else. A thick metal door slammed shut behind him as the human commander, Hale, led him into the observation room. The walls were lined with reinforced glass, overlooking the brutal training ground below. On the other side of the glass, human recruits stood at attention, waiting for their orders. Watch closely, Hale said. You wanted to see how we train. Now you will. The recruits were ordered into small groups. The first test began. At first, it seemed standard, an endurance challenge. Weighted packs strapped to their backs, they ran in formation, their expressions blank, focused. Then the real test started. Gunfire erupted from hidden turrets around the field. Not simulated fire, real bullets. Vorkath's eyes widened. You're shooting at your own recruits. Hale didn't look away from the glass. If they don't learn to dodge now, they'll never get the chance in real combat. The recruits didn't panic. They didn't break formation. They adapted. They moved with precision, dodging live rounds, using their environment as cover. One was hit. He kept running. Another fell, rolled to the side, and immediately got back up. There was no hesitation, no fear. Vorkath's claws tightened against his armored gauntlets. The next test was even worse. A large, dark chamber opened up below. The recruits were given knives, nothing else. They were thrown inside. The lights flickered. Something moved in the darkness. A deep, guttural growl echoed through the chamber. Vorkath's blood ran cold. That sound. That's a Ravager beast, he said, unable to hide his shock. A full-grown one. Hale nodded. Good ears. Yes, it is. Vorkath's throat tightened. He had fought Ravagers before, terrifying creatures bred for war. Even elite council warriors avoided facing one alone. But these weren't elite warriors. These were unarmed recruits. The beast lunged, massive claws clashing through the air. One recruit moved, too fast. He ducked under the swipe and slashed the beast's side. Another jumped onto its back, stabbing deep. The Ravager roared in pain, thrashing wildly, but the humans didn't let go. They fought like demons. By the time the creature collapsed, its massive body twitching in a pool of its own blood, the recruits were panting, covered in wounds, but still standing. Vorkath felt something he hadn't felt in years. Fear. Hale turned to him, eyes cold. You understand now, don't you? Vorkath's voice was hoarse. This isn't training. Hale smirked. No, it's preparation. Vorkath swallowed hard. Preparation for what? General Vorkath stood in stunned silence, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The recruits had killed a full-grown Ravager beast with nothing but knives, and they weren't celebrating. No cheering, no relief. They simply stood there, covered in blood, waiting for the next order. This wasn't military training. This was something far worse. Hale glanced at Vorkath. You look surprised, General. Vorkath turned his sharp gaze toward the human commander. This level of conditioning, it's not normal. His voice was low, controlled, but inside, he felt unsettled. You're not just training soldiers. You're creating something else. Hale folded his arms. We train survivors. Vorkath wanted to argue, to deny what he was seeing, but deep down, he knew the truth. The Galactic Council had gravely underestimated humanity. Before he could respond, the next phase of the test began. The recruits were led into a new chamber, a vast, empty room with reinforced steel walls. The only object inside was a single table. On the table sat a small black device. The recruits stood in a circle around it. Then a voice echoed through the speakers. This is a simulation of an enemy bioweapon. In 5 minutes, it will detonate. Your mission, disable it. Vorkath narrowed his eyes. A simple test. Hale smirked. Watch closely. The countdown began. The recruits moved instantly. No hesitation, no confusion. One group analyzed the device. Another checked for traps. A third scanned the walls, looking for possible exits. 4 minutes left. One recruit found a hidden panel. Another accessed a control terminal. They worked fast, communicating in short, precise commands. Their focus was absolute. 3 minutes left. A mistake. One recruit triggered a defense mechanism. A high-voltage shockwave blasted through the room. Several recruits collapsed, convulsing from the electricity. Vorkath stepped forward. "They need medical assistance." Hale stopped him. "No. Watch." Two recruits who had avoided the blast moved forward, dragging the injured ones aside without wasting a second. They kept working. 2 minutes left. The ones who had been electrocuted, they were getting back up. Their bodies shook, their hands were burned, but they refused to stay down. Failure was not an option. 1 minute left. A final command. A precise movement. The device was disabled. 0.2 seconds remaining. Vorkath let out a slow breath. His hands clenched behind his back. Hale turned to him. "You still think we're weak, General?" Vorkath's throat was dry. He had never thought humans were weak, but he had thought they were predictable. He had been wrong. "Your recruits, they don't fight like soldiers," Vorkath said finally. Hale's smirk returned. "No, they fight like survivors, like predators." The general's mind raced. If this was how humans trained their young soldiers, then what were their true warriors like? For the first time in his long career, Vorkath felt something he had never expected to feel toward humanity. Dread. General Vorkath's mind raced as he followed Commander Hale deeper into the facility. What he had seen so far had shaken him. These humans weren't just training for war. They were being forged into something far more dangerous. The Galactic Council had always considered them a minor species, useful, adaptable, but not a real threat. But now, after witnessing their brutal training, their raw resilience, and their sheer refusal to surrender, Vorkath was no longer sure. They entered a dimly lit hallway. The walls were reinforced metal, the floor vibrating slightly under their boots. A massive door slid open in front of them. Inside was another training ground, but this one was different. It wasn't a battlefield or an obstacle course. It was a war simulation. Vorkath stepped forward, eyes scanning the enormous holographic screens that surrounded the recruits. The room was completely enclosed, the ceiling lined with observation panels. In the center, a group of elite human soldiers stood at attention. Hale walked over to the control panel and pressed a button. The lights dimmed. The simulation began. A holographic battlefield appeared, stretching for miles. Cities burned in the distance. Enemy warships loomed overhead. The sky was filled with explosions, and thousands of alien soldiers marched forward. Vorkath recognized the enemy immediately. The Drax Dominion, the most feared species in the galaxy, a race of conquerors who had destroyed entire civilizations without mercy. The Council had fought against them for centuries, barely holding the line. And now, the humans were being tested against them. A deep voice echoed through the simulation. Scenario: total planetary invasion. Enemy strength: 500,000 troops. Human forces: 10,000. Objective: hold the planet at all costs. Vorkath stiffened. A battle like this was unwinnable. Outnumbered 50-1 against the Drax. Even the Council's best strategists would call this a hopeless fight. But the humans? They didn't hesitate. The simulation army split into small, highly mobile units. No rigid formations, no wasted movements. They scattered like a swarm of insects, spreading out across the ruined city, taking cover in alleyways, underground tunnels, and collapsed buildings. Vorkath watched in fascination. Most armies fought like a machine. The humans fought like a virus. The enemy forces advanced, their massive war machines crushing everything in their path. The first wave of human soldiers attacked, and then disappeared. "They're retreating?" Vorkath asked, frowning. Hale shook his head. "No, they're hunting." Seconds later, explosions erupted behind enemy lines. Snipers eliminated high-ranking officers. Every movement the enemy made was anticipated. Every weakness exploited. The Drax tried to regroup. It didn't matter. Human squads moved faster, hit harder, and never stayed in one place long enough to be pinned down. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. For every human that fell, 20 Dracs died. Vorkath's claws dug into his palms. The tide of battle turned. The once overwhelming enemy forces were reduced to chaos. Command structures collapsed. Fear spread through the alien ranks. Then the final blow. A single human squad infiltrated the enemy command post. They didn't negotiate. They didn't hesitate. They executed the enemy leadership in under 30 seconds. The simulation ended. The room fell silent. Vorkath exhaled slowly, his mind reeling. He had just watched an impossible victory unfold. Hale turned to him, his expression unreadable. Still think we don't belong in the Council's war efforts? Vorkath didn't answer, because deep down, he knew the truth. Humanity wasn't just another species. They were the future of warfare. The simulation room remained silent, but General Vorkath's mind roared with questions. How had humanity become this dangerous? The Galactic Council had always seen them as resourceful, sure, but this was something else entirely. Hale turned to the soldiers, nodding in approval. They stood at attention, but there was something different about them. They weren't just disciplined. They weren't just skilled. They were ruthless. Vorkath had seen elite soldiers from 100 different species, warriors from battle-hardened empires. Yet, standing in this room, watching these humans, he realized something terrifying. These weren't just trained fighters. They were survivors of something far worse than war. He had to know more. Commander Hale, Vorkath said slowly, this level of efficiency, this way of fighting, it's not natural. What made you this way? Hale studied him for a moment, then gestured for him to follow. They exited the simulation chamber, stepping into a darkened corridor. The walls were lined with old battle banners, medals, and black and white photographs. Vorkath frowned. These weren't pictures of war heroes. They were pictures of ruins. Cities burned. Soldiers stood in craters, their bodies covered in blood and dirt. Civilians, weak, starving, but still standing. Hale spoke without looking at him. Every species in the galaxy had time to evolve, to build, to grow. He stopped in front of a massive steel door. A single phrase was carved into it. Never again. Vorkath's sharp eyes scanned it. What does this mean? Hale pressed a panel, and the doors rumbled open. The room beyond was a war museum, but not like any Vorkath had seen before. There were no glorious statues of victors, no songs of triumph. Instead, there were records of suffering. Wars fought against impossible odds. Wars fought not to win, but to survive. Hale pointed at a section of the wall. The World Wars. Images of shattered cities. Billions dead. He moved further. The Famine Wars. Video footage of people clawing at dry earth, starving, fighting for every scrap of food. Another display. The Nuclear Crisis. The scars of radiation, generations of suffering. And then a last section. The AI War. The faces of soldiers who had fought against their own creations, machines that had nearly wiped them out. Hale turned to Vorkath. His voice was cold. You ask why we fight like this. Why we train like this. He pointed at the wall. Because every war we fought, we were outnumbered. Every war we fought, we were weaker. Every war we fought, we were supposed to lose. Vorkath looked at the thousands of names etched into the steel. The names of the fallen. The names of those who had refused to die quietly. Hale's next words sent a chill through Vorkath's spine. But we never lost. The realization struck him like a hammer. Humanity wasn't strong because of their weapons. They weren't dangerous because of their technology. They were dangerous because they never, ever stopped fighting. Even when they should have. Even when it was hopeless. Even when the rest of the galaxy would have surrendered. Vorkath clenched his fists. He had come here expecting to see a primitive species trying to prove themselves. Instead, he had found the most terrifying warriors in the galaxy. And now, he understood why the Galactic Council feared them. Because if war ever came to humanity's doorstep, The galaxy wouldn't be ready for their wrath. Vorkath felt the weight of history pressing down on him as he left the War Museum. He understood now. Humanity had not been shaped by peace, nor by steady progress like the other Council species. They had been forged in fire. But one question still burned in his mind. What was the true purpose of this facility? The simulations, the brutal training, the merciless combat tactics. This wasn't just preparation for war. This was something else. Something worse. Hale led him through another set of doors, entering a vast underground hangar. Vorkath stopped in his tracks. In front of him stood an armada. Rows upon rows of sleek, black warships, far different from the ones humanity had publicly displayed to the Galactic Council. These ships weren't designed for defense or patrol. They were built for extermination. Vorkath turned sharply to Hale, his voice tense. "What is this?" Hale remained calm. "Insurance." Vorkath narrowed his eyes. "For what?" Hale walked forward, running a hand along the hull of one of the ships. "The Council thinks we're just another species under their control. They think they can dictate our future. They think we'll always be the underdogs." He turned, and for the first time, Vorkath saw something terrifying in the human's eyes. Cold certainty. "They think we don't know what's coming," Hale continued. "That when war breaks out, we'll beg for their help. That we'll fight and die like obedient little soldiers in their wars." Vorkath's throat went dry. The Galactic Council had always assumed humanity was loyal, that they had no choice but to obey. Hale took a step closer. "They betrayed us once. We will never let it happen again." Vorkath realized the truth in an instant. This facility, this training, these weapons, humanity was preparing, not just for war. They were preparing for revenge. Hale's voice dropped lower, quieter, more dangerous. "They think they can control us. That will always be a part of their system." He gestured toward the fleet. "But they don't know the truth." Vorkath swallowed. "And what is the truth?" Hale leaned in. "We don't take orders. We give ultimatums." A deep hum filled the hangar as the warships powered up, rows of deadly weapons coming to life. Silent, precise, unstoppable. For the first time in his life, General Vorkath felt something he had never imagined he would feel toward humanity. Fear. The hangar pulsed with energy as the warships roared to life. This was no ordinary fleet. This was a declaration. Vorkath took a slow step back, his mind racing. The Council had no idea. They thought humanity was just another species, another pawn in their grand galactic game. They were wrong. Hale turned, his expression unreadable. "You look surprised, General." Vorkath's voice was careful, measured. The Council believed humanity was loyal. Hale let out a cold chuckle. The Council believed a lot of things. He gestured to the massive warships, their sleek black hulls absorbing the dim light. "They thought they could betray us, and we would forget." His expression darkened. "They thought wrong." Vorkath's claws flexed unconsciously. He had seen countless wars, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, but never had he encountered a species like this. A species that refused to stay down. A species that prepared for war, even in times of peace. A species that never forgot. A red light blinked on the control panel. A low, menacing alarm filled the hangar. Hale smiled. "They know." Vorkath's breath hitched. "The Council." Hale nodded. "Oh yes. Right about now, they're realizing the mistake they made." His fingers danced across the console. A massive hologram of the Galactic Council's central command station appeared. Vorkath's eyes widened. Dozens of human warships were already in position, waiting. The trap had been set long ago. Vorkath's voice was barely a whisper. "You've already planned this." Hale turned to him. "We planned this the moment the Council turned on us." The screen flickered. A transmission came through. An alien Council member, panic written across his face. "Humanity, stand down. This is an act of war. Hale leaned forward, his voice calm. Too calm. No, he said. This is an act of consequence. A signal was sent. Across the galaxy, Earth's hidden fleet emerged. Stealth ships decloaked. Weapon systems went online. The galaxy's illusion of control shattered in an instant. Vorkath watched in stunned silence. He had thought humanity was dangerous before. But now he understood. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were here to make sure no one ever dared to betray them again.